17, that's the number of lives that gets added to the ever-increasing list of those who are lost to school shootings. This time, the scene is a high school in Florida. Senator Chris Murphy blasted Congress for not doing anything to stop these horrific acts.
This happens nowhere else other than the United States of America. This epidemic of mass slaughter, this scourge of school shooting after school shooting. It only happens here not because of coincidence, not because of bad luck, but as a consequence of our inaction.
Now, Murphy is, of course, one of the senators from Connecticut. That's where Newtown was. The other one is Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal. And we remember Newtown all too well. We didn't do anything about it, but there were 20 kids, 6 adults killed there at the Sandy Hook Elementary School some 5 years ago. Senator, what are we going to do to stop these school shootings?
Chris, first, let me thank you and Allison for the great work that you're doing on the ground in Florida, because it is part of the answer that we educate America and make our nation aware of the awful toll of these mass atrocities, not just in schools, although there have been 400 people injured in 200 schools since Sandy Hook, many of them killed, but also day to day on our streets, 90 every day on average. It can happen everywhere, and it is happening everywhere. And what can we do? Well, Connecticut provides part of the answer. In the wake of Sandy Hook, we passed common sense measures that have actually reduced gun violence. These measures, like background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, other common sense steps, a number of them are pending before Congress right now. I've sponsored them with Republican colleagues. If we can break the glacier of our complicity in Congress, we can get measures done.
How do you do that? Because you can't do it state by state, right? Because if you don't have one rule, you wind up having all kinds of all this kind of variability. I mean, you look at Florida, the laws are so different than they are in Connecticut. But overall, you got 39 states in this country don't make it legally required to even say if someone has stolen your weapon. So there's a lot to do. What would make the Republicans want to deal with this issue? Now, Dave Jolly, who was a Republican congressman from Florida, he talked about this last night. Listen to what he said about his own party.
Let's be brutally honest about what we do know, and I say this as a Republican. Republicans will never do anything on gun control. Consider last summer you had Republican members of Congress shot and nearly killed during a softball practice, and they did nothing. After the Pulse nightclub, Democrats had a sit-in in the House. Republicans did nothing. After Vegas, hundreds injured, over 50 killed. Republicans did nothing. There are 2 things I would suggest tonight. First, flip the House. Flip the House. Republicans are not going to do a single thing after this shooting we saw today.
Is that true?
I think Republicans will act if they are faced with the prospect of mass losses in these elections. And in answer to your question, what can be done? In a word, elections. The advocates of gun violence prevention, like myself and other groups and organizations around the country, and they are springing up and growing in number and power, need to make this issue front and center a priority in these upcoming elections. And here are some glimmers of hope, Chris. First of all, in the last election, where states had gun violence prevention measures on their ballots, 3 out of 4 succeeded in referenda. And many candidates with this issue succeeded in elections last time around. Second, even now in the Congress, one of my colleagues, Senator Cornyn, has joined me in a measure that would tighten the kinds of information that are submitted to the background check system. We need to expand those background checks. He has not yet, nor has the Republican Party, joined in efforts to expand the background check.
Right.
But there are glimmers of hope, and we need to make this issue a groundswell, grassroots issue that really moves America.
Well, you got all of the negative momentum you could use, Senator. I mean, we are on pace for a record year this year in terms of school shootings. We're way ahead of the pace from last year. And the president, who promised that we would be talking about gun laws as time goes on after Las Vegas, hasn't said a word. And he just tweeted now in a way that completely explains the problem. He says so many signs that the Florida shooter was mentally disturbed, even expelled from school for bad and erratic behavior. Neighbors and classmates knew he was a big problem, must always report such instances to authorities again and again. Let's write it off to ignorance, but he has to know that, one, the citizenry is not the first line of damn defense against this kind of situation. And even if all of those things had been reported in Florida, you couldn't have taken any of the weapons away from this man. You couldn't even have stopped him from getting a weapon in Florida. So what is the president talking about?
The president has blamed it, in a sense, on mental health. All of the responsibility should be on people looking for troubled young men, alienated and potentially dangerous. Well, there are a lot of those young men in our society and a lot around the world. Why does the United States of America have such a high rate of mass gun violence? The answer is very simply that, consistent with the Second Amendment, we can tighten the rules that apply to gun purchases so that there are background checks, and so that restraining orders, for example, on men who have threatened women and who are convicted of that kind of domestic violence are prevented from gaining weapons. These kinds of measures, their common sense, actually work. And again, the state's experience reflects it. And you are absolutely right. You made a really key point that our state boundaries are porous. There's no way that guns can be prevented from coming into Connecticut from a state like South Carolina, where the rules are so much less responsible. And we are at the mercy of the weakest states, even when we have the strongest gun laws.
Well, it has to start with the fundamental question, Senator. You have to have politicians on both sides of the aisle asking, how do we stop these school shootings? Before that happens, no other step can follow logically or practically. But, Senator, thank you for stating the obvious this morning. Appreciate you being on the show as always.
Thank you.